It is April 1945. The Red Army is already deep inside Berlin. The end of the Third Reich is inevitable. The defense of the Reich capital is hopeless. In the bunker deep beneath the Reich Chancellery, there is a sense of departure. During a briefing with his generals, under the increasing pressure of heavy shelling on the Reich Chancellery grounds, Hitler decides in the early hours of April 21, 1945, to evacuate the bunker. At the airfields of Schönwalde and Tempelhof, several Junkers planes of the Führer's fleet, fully crewed, are on standby, awaiting their deployment orders. They are tasked with transporting people and material to the Alpine Fortress in southern Germany. Who and what secret cargo were to be transported in the government aircraft was under the strictest secrecy. 2 Junkers planes are scheduled to depart from Berlin to the southernmost part of Bavaria in the early hours of April 21st. The destination, Einring Airport near Salzburg. From there, it is only about a half-hour drive to the Führer's headquarters at Obersalzberg. The organization and execution of these transports are entrusted to Luftwaffen adjutant Nikolaus von Below and Hitler's personal adjutant, Julius Schaub. Among the many members of Hitler's close leadership staff set to make the journey south was his longtime servant, Willy Arndt. Arndt was tasked with making all necessary preparations for Hitler's arrival at Obersalzberg. Additionally, Hitler entrusted his valet with a sealed envelope containing personal writings. However, things did not go as planned. For several days, transport flights to Einring had been carried out whenever enemy air raids permitted. Hitler's chief pilot, Hans Bauer, was among the last remaining in the bunker and recalled these final days of April 1945 vividly.
I then told my men to try to fly out of here during the night hours. I'll head back to the Führer and stay with him. Don't wait for me or take me into consideration. I told them that I won't be coming back. I'll stay in the bunker and that my men have to try to get out of here. They did manage to fly out that same night, but unfortunately one of the planes was shot down.
On April 21st, the last 2 planes were scheduled to depart Berlin, heading south towards the Alpine Fortress. Among them was the plane of Major Anton Gundelfinger. Hans Bauer, the chief of the Führer's flight squadron and Hitler's personal pilot, had selected Gundelfinger, the experienced Lufthansa pilot, for this delicate mission. He is said to have remarked,
"Gundelfinger, Hitler specifically instructed me to tell you to be extra careful so that nothing happens."
In addition to a few passengers, numerous transport crates containing highly classified contents were to be transported on the same plane to Einring. Even the pilots themselves were not informed about the contents of the sensitive cargo, classified as secret Reich matter. The scheduled departure time for the plane heading south was set for 5 a.m. Alongside pilot Gundelfinger, the crew included Staff Sergeant Wilhelm Budak, Staff Sergeant Eugen Basler, and Sergeant Franz Westermeier. Some members of Hitler's inner circle remained behind in the Reich Chancellery bunker, along with Hitler himself. Among them was telephone operator Rochus Misch.
In the bunker below, General Krebs, General Bergdorf, a few military personnel, and Bormann were present. Otherwise, the bunker was sparsely occupied, as we had very little space to begin with. When Hanna Reich arrived with Ritter von Greim, she had to take a seat in the communication room with me, as there was no other place where she could sit comfortably. She had flown him in, which led to quite a bit of drama. The planes, including Hanna Reich's, were originally intended to evacuate the children, as well as the kitchen and administrative staff.
In his book, The Last Witness, Rochus Misch writes the following about the final days in the bunker of the Reich Chancellery.
The Ju-352, a plane from the Führer's fleet, took off 2 hours later than planned. Pilot Friedrich Gundelfinger, with whom I had undertaken many courier flights in recent years, called to say he was finally ready to depart for Reichenhall. My comrade Willy Arendt, Hitler's favorite servant, was sitting in the seat originally intended for my wife Gerda and the little one. Some time later I received the report that this very plane had been intercepted by the Allies and ordered to change its flight plan to Cologne. Gundelfinger did not comply. Ultimately, the plane crashed near Dresden. According to the reports, there were no survivors. The news spread quickly, particularly because Willy Arendt was on board.
April 21, 1945, 5 a.m. The second plane, piloted by Lieutenant Colonel Kurt Schulze, carrying only passengers and no cargo, took off as scheduled. Gundelfinger's plane departed about half an hour later, delayed due to the loading of the secret crates. As dawn began to break, Gundelfinger planned to fly his plane just above ground level. Shortly after passing Dresden, Gundelfinger's plane suddenly caught fire for unknown reasons. The pilot attempted an emergency landing in a nearby open field that was already in sight but clipped several tall trees, causing the plane to crash. Eyewitnesses from the village of Bernersdorf observed the crash and rushed to the site. However, the inferno and the repeated explosions of onboard ammunition made it impossible for the rescuers to save any survivors. Only the gunner, Franz Westermeier, and a member of Hitler's escort command, SS Rottenführer Gerhard Becker, survived the crash. Rottenführer Becker was taken to a nearby field hospital, but succumbed to his injuries a day later. The second survivor, Franz Westermeier, was questioned multiple times about the cause of the crash but claimed he couldn't remember anything. He took the secret to his grave in 1980. An SS unit stationed nearby rushed to the crash site, recovered the charred bodies, and secured the cargo that had survived the fire. The crates were initially stored on a nearby farm while awaiting further instructions. The crash of this Ju-352 and the mysterious crates from the Reich Chancellery became the basis for the largest forgery scandal in post-war history during the 1980s. The discovery of the Hitler Diaries. At the time, painter and antiques dealer Konrad Kujau claimed that Hitler's diaries had been transported in the Reich Chancellery crates and were now in the hands of a relative of his, a general in the German Democratic Republic.
From that point on, he began forging at will. Later, when General Bauer visited Mr. Stiefel and saw the entire collection, Bauer remarked that these items could only have come from the crashed plane that once belonged to the Führer's flight squadron and had been lost to him at the time. This statement piqued his interest, and from then on, he built on this story. When I met him later, he also told me about a crashed plane that allegedly contained all of Hitler's belongings. Since this plane actually existed, I believed his stories. I then did my part, researching the history of the plane, obtaining the relevant books, and essentially completing my task. However, I repeatedly emphasized that the paper and other details should also be carefully examined.
It was only later, after two of the diaries had already been published, that Kujau's extensive forgery was exposed through material analysis. Today, part of Kujau's extensive forgeries can be viewed at the Kujau cabinet in Bietigheim-Bissingen. The museum's director, Mark Oliver Boger, has not only displayed numerous exhibits of Kujau's work, but also parts of the crashed plane. He has meticulously researched the facts surrounding the crash of the plane from the Führer's flight squadron.
Yes, it is well known that Hitler had amassed a small private archive in the Führerbunker and the Reich Chancellery. In 1945, near the end of the war, it was flown out of Berlin toward Berchtesgaden, where the so-called final battle in the Alpine Fortress was to take place. The plane that was loaded, a Junkers 352 with the designation KTVC, was loaded near Berlin and sent toward Berchtesgaden. However, this plane crashed in Bernersdorf, Saxony. The aircraft caught fire mid-air, broke apart upon impact and scattered its cargo and passengers. Some were ejected, while others were trapped inside and burned beyond recognition. In the display case behind me, I have several items from the crash site. These include fragments of the aircraft that were later recovered, pieces of the fuel line made of iron, aluminum fragments, and the map case and headphones of radio operator Eugen Basler. These were given to a historian researching the topic by the surviving family. Here's something special: the insignia of the Führer's flight squadron. When Hitler learned that the plane had not arrived and was presumed lost, he was inconsolable and visibly distressed. He stated that the plane contained important documents meant to provide future generations with insight into his political actions. Among those lost was his favorite servant, Arndt, whose death deeply affected him. There were only 2 survivors. The plane was completely burned out. The remaining cargo was collected by a Wehrmacht unit stationed nearby, loaded onto trucks, and transported toward Berchtesgaden.
You can learn more about Kujau's extensive forgeries in the documentary Kujau Cabinet, Beware of Forgeries, which is also available on BEGAFILM's channel. Meanwhile, in the Reich Chancellery bunker, they waited in vain for the landing report of Major Gundelfinger's plane. In his book Mit Mächtigen zwischen Himmel und Erde, Hitler's chief pilot Hans Bauer describes the situation as follows.
We received landing reports from all the planes during the night or early morning hours, except from Gundelfinger's plane. The attempts to locate the plane were unsuccessful. When I reported this to Hitler, he was very agitated. This was because of all planes, it was this one that carried one of his servants who was especially dear to him. I entrusted him with exceptionally important files and documents which were meant to serve as a testament to my actions for future generations, he said.
Gerd Heidemann's research revealed that the crates that were not destroyed in the crash were initially stored in a nearby farmhouse. Days later, they were transported by land to their original destination, the Obersalzberg near Berchtesgaden.
I conducted research in Bernersdorf, and the farmer who was supposedly mentioned by Kujau did exist. When I was there, I even obtained a map of the village from the Stasi officers who accompanied us. The houses were marked as silhouettes on the map, and I knew exactly where Farmer Hoffman lived. It was the last house on the lower left side of the village.
3 days after the plane crash, on April 24th, the SS Wehrmacht unit set out on their journey south, carrying the mysterious crates. At this point, none of the soldiers knew that Germany's unconditional surrender was only days away. The route toward the Alpine Fortress was perilous. The Allies had achieved total air superiority over Germany, and the convoy advanced slowly. Delivering the crates was of the highest priority, and they were taking no risks. When the unit reached the foothills of the Alps on April 26, 1945, they learned that the Obersalzberg had been attacked the day before by 218 Lancaster bombers, destroying all the buildings. At the time of the attack, only Heinrich Lammers, Hermann Göring with his entourage, and the commander of Obersalzberg, Dr. Bernhard Frank, were present on the mountain. Everyone else from Hitler's leadership staff had already left. As a final refuge, they chose an inn about 16 kilometers from Obersalzberg, the Alpenhof at Hintersee. The SS unit was also redirected to Hintersee. Gerhard Bartels, the son of the then-owner August Bartels, still vividly remembers the arrival of the trucks carrying the mysterious crates at Hintersee.
I was born on January 6, 1932, in Bischofswiesen. My father, August Bartels, came from Münsterland. During the First World War, he met my mother at Hintersee. Originally a farmer, he later worked in the Hotel Post, owned by my grandparents, which was part of our family business. Starting in 1935, he was a member of the Sturmabteilung and later became Ortsbauernführer. That's like a local farmers' leader in Ramsau until 1941. The Alpenhof was built in 37 and 38, just in time before the war. Even then, building materials were scarce, especially metal. After the bombing on April 25, 1945, Bormann's staff moved into our hotel. Most of them came from Berlin. The inner circle, personal attendants, adjutants, altogether at least 30 people, including children. I recorded names and addresses back then. Among those present were figures like Frau Linger, Adjutant Puttkamer, and the secretaries Schröder and Junge. They all stayed at Alpenhof. SS generals were also among the guests. 3 planes, originally bound for Obersalzberg, arrived with them as well. They brought with them 800 quintals of coffee beans, which were stacked to the ceiling in a large garage. In front of these sacks stood 3 crates, each about 1 meter by 1 meter, labeled Secret Reich Matter. These crates were strictly guarded around the clock by the SS. I suspected these crates were connected to a plane crash in Bernersdorf. The events unfolded around April 25th and 26th, 1945. On April 30th, I was at the hotel when an SS general, who also lived in the house, appeared with a pistol in hand. He went from person to person, announcing, "The Führer is dead." Everyone sat silently, visibly distressed. The tension in the room was palpable. Had anyone laughed, I'm certain they would have been shot. In early May, likely on the 1st or 2nd, the men disappeared one by one. Some fled across the Austrian border, others over the Hirschbickel Pass to Austria, then to Argentina or Italy. Some were caught, for instance, at the Karlbrunn Alm. It was even said that Otto Skorzeny was in the area, along with other high-ranking generals. A large convoy of vehicles was prepared to cross the border, but the plan failed. An armored reconnaissance vehicle blocked the road at Hirschbickel, and the convoy backed up all the way down to what is now the National Park Center.
Hitler's leadership staff had fled over the Hirschbickel Pass into Austria, with some continuing on to Italy. But what happened to the mysterious crates and their enigmatic contents? The unwieldy cargo would have been a hindrance during their escape. It is believed that the contents of the large crates were divided into smaller ones, making them easier to transport using mules. There are also eyewitness accounts to support this theory, as we will learn later. Everything happened in great haste as the advancing U.S. 7th Army had already occupied Munich and was moving southward. From the east, the Third Army had already taken Linz.
The coffee remained in our garage for a while and was later distributed to the people in Ramsau and Berchtesgaden. But as for the crates, at some point they disappeared. I don't know when. My Aunt Nannel, she lived at the Gamsbock Hotel 300 meters down the road, saw a mule convoy passing by one early morning, loaded with said crates. I don't know where those crates ended up, but after a short period of time, the mules came back empty. The chests were gone. In the mid-1950s, some people from Warsaw, either the police or an intelligence service, I'm not sure which, came by and asked about the crates. They wanted to know if they had been dumped in the lake. I had no idea. I told them, maybe, could be. Then they conducted some investigations, but I don't know what came of it. We never heard from them again.
Since then, nearly 80 years have passed, and little has changed at Hintersee. As Gerd Bartels already mentioned, Anna Kotler, the owner of the Gamsbock Hotel, saw the mule train carrying crates pass by her house in the early morning hours during the first days of May 1945. Before the road leads into the forest, SS guards reportedly set up a roadblock, according to Anna Kotler. About 20 minutes later, the mule caravan returned without the crates. At least this is how the story has been passed down. A connection between the crash of the Führer's plane in Bernersdorf and the last Reich Chancellery at the Hotel Alpenhof on Hintersee was only recently established. Yet many questions remain unanswered. How did the Polish intelligence service know about the crates stored at Alpenhof? Bartels himself had never spoken about them before. What was in these crates that attracted interest beyond national borders? It is assumed that the crates were transported by mules into difficult terrain and buried. If Anna Kotler's time estimate is correct, that the group was only gone for about 20 minutes. The search radius is somewhat narrowed. Still, in rugged terrain, countless hiding spots remain possible, not least in the lake itself. Perhaps, however, the crates were recovered by members of this SS unit in the years after the war. So far, all searches have been unsuccessful, and perhaps this adds yet another chapter to the existing myths about alleged Nazi treasures.